Our final installment on the series on David, 2 Samuel. Our text today is from chapter 24. I'll begin reading in verse 10. But afterward, David was stricken to the heart because he had numbered the people. David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done, but now, O Lord, I pray you, take away the guilt of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. When David rose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and say to David thus says the Lord, 3 things I offer you, choose one of them, and I will do it. So Gad came to David and told him, and he asked him, Shall 3 years of famine come to you on your land? Or will you flee 3 months before your foes while they pursue you? Or shall there be 3 days pestilence in your land? Now consider and decide what answer I shall return to the one who sent me. Then David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but let me not fall into human hands. So the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel from that morning until the appointed time, and 70,000 of the people died, from Dan to Beersheba. But when the angel stretched out his hand toward Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented concerning the evil and said to the angel who was bringing destruction among the people, It is enough. Now stay your hand. The angel of the Lord was then by the threshing floor of Uriah the Jebusite. When David saw the angel who was destroying the people, he said to the Lord, I alone have sinned. I alone have done wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Let your hand, I pray, be against me and against my father's house. Let us pray. You, O God, are the beginning and the end. You are the Holy One. We bow before your throne, we give you praise. But we confess that bowing is hard for us to do. We spend our weeks trying to clamor and climb and secretly hope that people will bow to us. Forgive us. Forgive us and remind us in worship that you alone are God. You precede time. You hold eternity. You are the author of all good things. And we give you our worship. While we give you thanks for your goodness, we also confess that life is hard. We are burdened with sickness and sadness, debt and disease, broken relationships and broken hope. We carry the guilt of our bad decisions in the past. We face the burden of difficult decisions ahead. Show us your mercy. Grant us release from our guilt, healing for our pain, discernment for what is ahead. May all of our life be in movement toward you, O God. May our faith look up to you. Amen. Have you considered to what extent every day is packed with decisions to be made? One question to answer after the next. From alarm clock to good night, it is just one relentless question after the next. Mine usually starts with, do I hit snooze? And at some point, I showered last night. Do I need another one this morning? Is it going to be cheese toast or Fruit Loops? Gray pants or brown? Put a load in the laundry or wait till I get home? Do I need a raincoat? And this is all before you've opened the door. Hundreds of decisions every day, and most of them on autopilot. Most decisions don't require any real anguish. They don't task us. Most decisions we make, we don't do the list with the line down the middle and pros and cons. Chunky chocolate or butter pecan does not require a season of discernment. However, there are some decisions that come more rarely where we have to draw back, weigh the options. In some cases, we're deciding between good and bad, right and wrong. In our weeks together, we've been looking at the life of David. And there were a lot of big decisions David had to make where he dropped back and weighed the decisions and the outcomes. He didn't make all of them well. For instance, he had to decide, do I bring the Ark of the Covenant back and make it at the center of the sacred life of Israel? On that one, he weighs, decides yes, good decision. He also had to decide whether to invite Bathsheba over when she was through with her bath and get to know her better. He said yes, bad decision. But life is full of making decisions. Sometimes we're choosing between good and bad, right and wrong. And most of our moral development is building the strength of character that is required to choose good over bad, right over wrong. We start learning this as children. Some of you familiar with the child's poem, John, Tom, and James? John was a bad boy and beat a poor cat. Tom put a stone in a blind man's hat. James was the boy who neglected his prayers. They've all grown up ugly and nobody cares. Well, you see, if these boys had just chosen good, if Tom had not put a stone in a blind man's hat, things might have turned out better for the guy. And clearly, this is part of our faithful task. We need to keep studying and praying and worshiping to develop moral clarity, personal resolve to choose what is good over what is bad, to choose what is right over what is wrong. But there is another category still that's even more complex. How do you choose between good and good? How do you choose between bad and bad? How do you choose when the decisions are between no and heck no? Sometimes all of the answers look bad. And sometimes we would have the resolve to choose what is right if only we knew what was right. Sometimes it's just hard to know which one's right. And the really hard questions are the ones that are stuck in that in-between place. Do I take a lesser paying job to be off the road so I can spend more time with my son? Do I tell Dad it's time for him to move to assisted living? Do I endure chemo and radiation when the doctors are telling me that the cancer is so advanced it's going to win anyway? It's the second time she's cheated. I can't even stand to look at her right now, and yet she's begging to come back home. What do I do? There are some of life's questions that do not toggle between good and bad. They're decisions between no and heck no. This is where we find King David today. This is where he is. He's caught in a decision with no good answers. God is angry. We're not told why. It might be that this story is connected to the one right before it, where David has asked for a census. He's asked for a head count on all of the able-bodied males in all of the region. And of course, the only reason to get this kind of head count is if you're trying to deal with a project of forced labor, or trying to conscript an army, or trying to do something with taxes. Well, none of these is real popular. Nobody in the region is happy. It also hints at a loss of confidence in God. It doesn't show much trust. Counting the size of the army is kind of like neurotic checking of the bank balances. We trust God, but we still ought to count, right? Well, David learns there are 800,000 men in Israel, 500,000 men in Judah, and he can't find a happy one in the bunch. All of the region is unhappy because of this census. Nobody wants their boys carted off to war. Nobody wants their young men in a royal building project, and nobody wants to be taxed some more. There's some who even think it's an attack on their theological principles. Everything's in a mess, and it's of David's own doing, and we're not told how he comes to recognize that he's made a dreadful and unfaithful decision, but he confesses and repents. "O Lord, I pray you, take away the guilt of your servant, for I have done very foolishly." And then the prophet Gad comes in the next morning and says, "King, I have heard from the Lord, and you have 3 choices about your punishment in this matter. And the bad news is none of them are good. But at least in this case, you're going to get to choose your poison. But I got to tell you up front, I've got the 3 options. You're not going to like any of them. Number 1, you can choose 3 years of famine. Number 2, you can choose 3 months of military pursuit by your enemies. Or 3, you can choose 3 days of pestilence, that is a plague or an epidemic. So what do you do when you've got 3 choices and all of them are bad? Well, David does get to pick his punishment. He gets to go select the hickory switch on this one, which doesn't make any of this much easier. But he immediately rules out 3 months of military pursuit, and it's an interesting reason to rule that one out. His faith is returning to him, and he finds that that particular option is unfaithful. David trusts God, and famine can't be controlled by humans. Pestilence can't be controlled by humans. But a war has a human dimension to it, and he wants all of this in the hands of God. He takes war off the table. In God's hands, David might have some hope for mercy, but if he puts it in human hands, maybe not. So he weighs and weighs and weighs, and pestilence it is. Let's go with door number 3. Now, this might sound foreign to our present sensibilities, the idea that God sends an epidemic. But Walter Brueggemann reminds us that this story is told in a world where there are no secondary causes. In that worldview, God is the cause of all of life, good and bad. God is God. God is the only one sitting at the switch. That was the worldview of the time. But it is interesting, isn't it, that there is already a measure of mercy in this decision, because David gets to choose. In the prophetic writings of Ezekiel and Jeremiah, both of the prophets anticipate predicting that God will send pestilence, sword, and famine. Pestilence, sword, and famine, all 3. So maybe David is getting shown mercy already, because he gets to choose just one of the lethal trio. But it's still a rotten choice, isn't it? It is still Sophie's choice. What do you do when you have 3 choices and all of them are bad? He at least will take his chances with God. His deep faith has informed his decision, And as it turns out, it is justified, because before the 3 days of plague are over, God repents. Yes, God changes God's mind, stops the epidemic before the 3 days are completed. But still, David is put on a grueling path of decision. How do you choose when all three choices are bad? I mean, 3 years of famine is going to hurt one group of people, maybe not another. 3 months of war is going to necessarily kill some of these people and not these. Three days of plague are going to kill these and not. How do you choose who gets to live and who gets to die? This is where I wish I had better news. The story gives us no clean answers. There's no indication that David chose the right answer or the wrong answer. He took one out of play because it did not show enough faith in God, but he was still stuck with two bad choices. And I wish the story gave us better answers. I wish it told us clearly how to make a hard decision, and it doesn't. Now, if you want clear directions on how to make a hard decision, there are religious books at the checkout counter at Kroger. And you can get and it'll have 1, 2, 3, and it'll check it all off. But my experience has been more complicated than that. Every difficult decision is a decision between competing values. And one value must lose. And that's what makes it hard. The sad reality is that we have to say no to something we value in a hard decision in order to say yes to something else. And that's what makes it hard and messy and complicated. I was told that a reporter once asked President Obama, how many really difficult decisions do you have to make in a day? And he said, all of them are really difficult decisions. If they weren't, somebody would have made them before they made it to my desk. A truly difficult decision involves choosing between two or more important values. The company's publishing division lost $600,000 last year and $450,000 the year before. The company has 88 employees in that division. You can't keep losing money. You've got to hold that value. If you shut down that area of the company, 88 families lose jobs and are impacted. That's a value. How do you do that? How do you choose between bad and bad? Our most public figures at this juncture are the politicians who make these decisions every day. Decisions between two things they care about. Now, I'm going off sermon a minute. This is a little rant, so just forgive me. I don't do this a lot. I'm going to just go on a little rant, and then we're going to come back to the sermon. But here's the rant. I'm growing tired of the media and Facebook posts that treat all politicians as though they do not care about the other value at all. It's polarizing the country. This oversimplified thinking is also impacting our churches. For instance, the congresswoman must vote on whether or not to make cuts in Medicare. If she votes one way, then some of the media outlets are going to start declaring that she obviously does not care about the country's debt problem. She just wants to spend. She doesn't care. She doesn't care if the whole country just goes under. She doesn't care. She just wants to spend. She'll run the country into the ground financially. She doesn't care. If she votes the other way, other media outlets will say, well, she obviously doesn't care about old people. If she cared about old people, she wouldn't vote that way. She'll just discard old people if it'll save a buck. She obviously doesn't care. Well, there's a chance she cares deeply about the country's spiraling debt, and that she cares very much about the elderly, and that she's having to choose between pestilence and famine. Sometime there are no good choices. And we all know what it's like to toss and turn and weigh and wonder and make the gut-wrenching decisions that involve two competing values. How do you weigh it out? And we do harm when we treat anybody else's difficult decision as simple, or treat other people as evil if they don't weigh out, measure, and cut competing values just like we would. Okay, my rant is over. We can get back to the sermon now. I got that out of my system. We can go. Is there any hope in this story for us? Is there anything we can learn to help us the next time we find ourselves stuck with a decision between good and good, or between no and heck no? Well, first, David takes ownership of his part of the bad situation. He doesn't play victim. He doesn't blame God or Gad or anybody else. He confesses his wrongdoing and declares that it is his wrongdoing that got him into this mess in the first place. Secondly, he prays to discern if there are any unfaithful options. In his case, remember, 3 options. He declared that being pursued by his enemies would be an unfaithful option. He took that one off the table. But finally, he just moves humbly into the bitter wind that's ahead. As I said, I wish we got more help on this one, but we don't. Sometimes we're just dealt a bad hand. Sometimes we make a mess of things ourselves. Sometimes we face almost unbearably difficult decisions. And perhaps the best we can do is pray and discern if any direction is unfaithful and take that off the table. And then just walk boldly and prayerfully into the horribly difficult choice that's ahead. But when we do this, there is a remarkable biblical theme. I wish I had time to trace it throughout, but you're already thinking about this theme when you think about the Garden of Eden and Noah's Ark. But there is this theme of mercy, that God never does all that God might do before coming through with mercy. In this story, it wasn't 3 days. God pulls back and God is merciful. In some manner, in whatever it is we carry, God's mercy will emerge. The best we can do is make our best call, trust the God who loves us, and look closely for the ways God's mercy shows up and say thanks be to God. Let us stand and sing and respond.